Is this the new Hachiko? Witness the emotional journey of a stray dog who never gave up on finding the courier who saved him. You won't believe how far he goes, and the heartwarming reunion that awaits. Michael Henderson woke up before dawn every day, just as the soft glow of the early morning sky spread over the horizon. He lived in a modest studio apartment in a bustling city on the East Coast. A tall man in his late 20s with sandy brown hair and gentle blue eyes, Michael worked as a courier, delivering important documents, packages, and even medical supplies across the city and its outskirts. His job demanded punctuality, physical endurance, and an unwavering commitment to getting the task done, no matter how challenging the route or the weather might be. Michael's life was simple. He thrived on routine: wake up at 5, shower quickly, throw on his uniform, sling his messenger bag across his back, and dart out the door. He had a battered green bicycle that he'd lovingly named "O.L. Betsy," and although it wasn't particularly flashy, it never failed him. He took pride in weaving through the city streets, balancing time-sensitive deliveries. He enjoyed the sense of freedom that came with his job, a freedom that allowed him to see the city from a more intimate perspective than most people in office buildings or cars ever did. The day of the discovery. Late one chilly afternoon in mid-November, when the golden sun was just beginning its descent, Michael finished delivering his last package to a downtown law office. He was riding back home with a sense of satisfaction that came from completing his daily tasks. His breath puffed in the cold, and he found himself looking forward to a quiet evening of reheating leftover pizza and catching up on his favorite TV series. As he turned onto a quieter residential street, lined with old maple trees that had shed their bright leaves in a crunchy carpet on the sidewalk, he spotted a small, ragged shape huddled between two trash cans in an alley. At first, he couldn't quite make it out, but something about the tremor of that silhouette tugged at his heart. Curiosity and concern spurred him to slow his bicycle and climb off. He took a few tentative steps, calling out in a gentle voice, "Hey there, you okay?" The figure moved slightly. As Michael got closer, he realized it was a dog, a large, mixed-breed dog that appeared painfully thin, its fur matted with dirt and debris. The dog's eyes, a rich caramel color, were full of exhaustion and fear. Michael wasn't sure how to proceed, worried about startling the poor creature. He knelt down a few feet away, lowering his voice. "It's okay, buddy," he murmured softly. "I'm not here to hurt you." The dog, ribs visible beneath the grimy fur, raised its head and let out a feeble whine. It looked like it hadn't eaten in days. One of its paws seemed injured, a slight swelling indicating it might have stepped on glass or had a run-in with something sharp. Despite the possibility of being bitten, Michael's empathy overcame caution. He reached into his courier bag and pulled out a half-eaten sandwich he'd been saving. Careful not to startle the dog, he broke off a small piece of turkey and placed it on the ground in front of him. "Go on," he coaxed gently. "Have something to eat." The dog's nose twitched, it took a few hesitant sniffs. Then, deciding Michael was not a threat, it limped forward and snapped up the morsel. Michael repeated the process until the sandwich was entirely gone, all the while talking in a soothing tone. The dog, though clearly wary, stopped trembling as violently. First act of care. Michael's heart ached for the animal. Looking at the dog's pitiful state, he couldn't bring himself to leave it behind. He pulled out his phone and made a call to one of the local veterinary clinics that stayed open later into the evening. "Hi," he said politely, "I found a stray dog that's in pretty bad shape. Do you take walk-ins or emergencies?" The receptionist on the other end of the line told him they would, as long as he could get there before closing. Michael looked at his watch. He had less than an hour, and the clinic was across town. Normally, he might have hopped on his bike and sped away, but he didn't want to leave the dog alone. Instead, he took off his courier jacket and carefully wrapped it around the dog, lifting the surprisingly light creature into his arms. The dog gave a small yelp but didn't struggle much. In that moment, Michael felt a protective surge, as though this dog were already his responsibility. He managed to flag down a passing taxi, unusual as it was for him to take cabs, and asked the driver if it was okay to bring a dog in. The driver hesitated but, seeing the dog's sorry state, relented. The ride to the vet was swift, though Michael's heart pounded with worry the entire time. He kept whispering to the dog, "You're gonna be all right. I promise." The vet visit. When they arrived at the clinic, the veterinary team acted quickly. They examined the dog, cleaned and dressed the injured paw, and gave him 4 fluids. The dog's condition was dire, severely underweight, dehydrated, with fleas and several cuts along his body. The vet estimated the dog was only about 2 or 3 years old, an adult but still quite young. Despite everything, the dog exhibited a resilient spirit, enduring each test and shot with minimal fuss. Michael lingered by the examination table, stroking the dog's head. "You're a fighter," he whispered. "I can see that in your eyes. You're not giving up, are you?" The dog looked back at him, tail giving a slow, faint wag. It was the dog's first display of any sort of positive emotion since Michael had found him. At the end of the examination, the veterinarian came over. "He's going to need some extended care, maybe a day or 2 here, just to stabilize him and watch out for infection. We can give him a bath once we're sure it's safe. But after that, he'll need a home. Are you planning to adopt him?" Michael had never considered adopting a pet. His job kept him out and about for hours, plus he wasn't sure he had the means to support a dog with high medical needs. But when he looked back at those caramel eyes, something deep in his chest told him he couldn't just walk away. "Yes," he said, somewhat surprised to hear his own voice. "I'll adopt him." Naming the dog and new life. 2 days later, after the dog had been rehydrated, partially groomed, and vaccinated, Michael brought him home. He named him Murphy, thinking it had a friendly, easygoing ring to it. Murphy walked gingerly on his bandaged paw, sniffing around Michael's small apartment with caution and curiosity. The first few weeks were all about building trust. Michael would wake up early, earlier than usual, to take Murphy out for short walks, letting him grow accustomed to the sights, sounds, and smells of the neighborhood. Murphy was skittish at first, especially around strangers, but he seemed to feel safe as long as he stayed near Michael's side. At home, Michael devoted himself to restoring Murphy's health. He bought high-quality dog food recommended by the vet and measured out each meal carefully, watching with pride as Murphy slowly gained weight. He scheduled weekly check-ins with the clinic to ensure Murphy's paw was healing correctly. During those visits, the vet was always amazed at how swiftly Murphy was regaining his energy and spirit. The dog's fur started to shine, and the happiness in his eyes grew each day, deepening the bond. As the weeks turned into months, Michael and Murphy developed an unbreakable bond. Murphy accompanied Michael on local deliveries whenever feasible. Sometimes, Michael would attach a small trailer to his bike, lined with a soft blanket so Murphy could sit comfortably and watch the world go by. Neighborhood kids would point and grin at the sight of the friendly dog enjoying his ride. They had their routines, weekend visits to the dog park, where Murphy would sprint freely, chasing after tennis balls and befriending other dogs. Michael discovered that Murphy was particularly fond of squirrels. Any time a squirrel darted past, Murphy would perk up and stare intently, though never quite brave enough to give chase. In the evenings, Michael would settle on his threadbare couch, Murphy lying at his feet or sometimes resting his head on Michael's lap as he watched TV. On colder nights, they'd share an old quilt, the gentle crackle of the apartment's heating system lulling both man and dog into a comfortable doze. Neighbors began to recognize them as a pair, Michael and Murphy. It was hard to recall a time when Michael had been on his own. Murphy's presence radiated warmth, making the once sterile apartment come alive. Above the small fireplace mantel, Michael placed a framed photo of the two of them taken by a fellow courier, Michael with one hand firmly gripping the handlebars, the other resting on Murphy's back, both smiling at the camera. Murphy in his own doggy way, tongue lolling happily. The forced separation. Life was good. Then, one crisp morning, Michael received unexpected news. A local tech startup in California needed urgent courier assistance for an ongoing project, and Michael's company had been chosen. He was one of the most reliable couriers on the team, so management asked if he'd be willing to relocate temporarily, just a few months, they promised, to help establish the company's footprint across the coast. Michael was torn. He needed the money. The pay bump for this special assignment would secure a far more stable future for him and Murphy. The problem was the trip would be at least 3 months long. Housing constraints and the unpredictable nature of the assignment made it difficult to bring Murphy along. Worried about Murphy's well-being, Michael reached out to his best friend, Jared Thompson, a warm-hearted teacher who lived in a suburb nearby. Jared had a spacious yard and loved dogs, so it seemed like the perfect solution. After a few phone calls, Jared agreed to look after Murphy until Michael could return. But parting was not easy. On the day Michael left for California, he packed his duffel bag, double-checked that Murphy's favorite toys were in a box, along with plenty of dog food, Murphy's bed, and updated medical documents. Murphy sensed something was amiss, pacing nervously around Michael's feet. Michael knelt down, hugging Murphy tightly. "It's just for a little while, buddy," he whispered, his eyes misting. "I promise I'll come back for you." Missing each other. Over in Jared's home, Murphy felt the absence of Michael acutely. Jared did his best to keep Murphy comfortable, providing a soft dog bed near the fireplace, playing fetch in the yard, and maintaining the same meal schedule. But Murphy was visibly anxious, often sitting by the window, ears pricked, waiting for the faintest sign of Michael. He spent sleepless nights near the front door, whining softly. Miles away in California, Michael worked tirelessly, meeting deadlines and establishing courier routes for the tech startup. He kept pictures of Murphy on his phone and often found himself scrolling through them during his breaks. Whenever Jared updated him, sharing that Murphy ate well or that he romped around with other neighborhood dogs, Michael felt a bittersweet relief. Yet the underlying ache of separation never fully disappeared. The months dragged on, each day feeling longer than the last. On weekends, Michael would video call Jared, hoping to catch Murphy's attention. Sometimes Murphy would look at the screen, ears twitching at the sound of Michael's voice, but the confusion in the dog's eyes was evident. He couldn't understand why Michael was there in the phone and not right beside him. The escape. Late one afternoon, about 2 months into Michael's absence, Jared took Murphy out for his usual walk around the block. The sky was overcast, threatening rain. Suddenly, a car backfired loudly nearby, startling Murphy. Already anxious, Murphy panicked and jerked the leash out of Jared's hand, sprinting down the street before Jared could catch up. Jared chased him for several blocks, calling out, "Murphy! Stop!" but the dog vanished among the maze of suburban houses. Frantic with worry, Jared spent hours circling the neighborhood. He searched the nearby parks and even posted on community message boards. No luck. As darkness settled, Jared felt waves of guilt crash over him. He called Michael and explained everything, apologizing repeatedly. Michael, equally distressed, tried to comfort Jared, saying, "Don't blame yourself. We'll find him." Murphy's journey back. Murphy, in a near panic, dashed blindly through the unfamiliar streets. Something deep inside him guided him in a direction that felt more like home. He no longer smelled Jared's yard or the treats that Jared offered. Instead, he focused on a faint memory, Michael's scent, the comforting smell of the old studio apartment, the particular corners of the city where he used to accompany Michael on deliveries. Over the next few days, Murphy roamed. He survived by drinking from puddles and sometimes rummaging through trash cans. He had lost weight and was growing thin again. But a determined spirit drove him on. Whenever he encountered strangers, he'd bolt, fear gripping him from his past experiences on the street. But no matter how tired or hungry he became, he kept pressing on. In the meantime, Jared and Michael put up flyers, contacted animal shelters, and scoured every lead they could find. Jared would drive around for hours, calling out Murphy's name. Michael, feeling helpless from so far away, reached out to local humane societies, but the distance made it challenging. Sleep came only in fits for both men, who feared the worst for the dog they both loved. The waiting dog. It took nearly 2 weeks before Murphy finally found his way to Michael's old neighborhood. Though battered, paw pads sore, and fur dull from exposure to the elements, Murphy recognized the familiar architecture and scents. On a cold dawn, he limped to Michael's building, a place he had once known as home. Standing in front of the door to the apartment complex, Murphy whined softly. He waited, sniffing at the door and scratching at it in short bursts. But Michael wasn't there. Confused, Murphy circled the block, then found a spot beneath the overhang of the building's entryway to shelter from the biting wind. Day after day, Murphy remained. The neighbors who recognized him from those months riding with Michael's courier bike tried to coax him indoors, offering food and warmth. But Murphy, loyal as ever, refused to leave the doorstep. He would accept scraps of food and water, but then he'd return to waiting, eyes fixed on the door as though expecting Michael to appear at any moment. News spread among the tenants. Some took pity on the dedicated dog, giving him blankets and building a makeshift shelter. The landlord, initially unhappy about a stray dog loitering around, backed off when he realized the dog belonged to Michael and that local residents had taken a liking to him. Michael's return. Back in California, Michael finally wrapped up his assignment earlier than planned. Once the project concluded, he barely waited to receive his final check before booking a flight home. The moment he landed, he called Jared, who informed him of Murphy's disappearance and rumored return to Michael's building. Heart pounding, Michael jumped into a taxi, giving the driver the address with an urgency that nearly made his voice crack. When the taxi pulled up to Michael's old apartment, the first thing he saw under the soft glow of a streetlight was a skinny, scruffy dog curled up on the doorstep. Even from a distance, he recognized Murphy's shape, though it was painfully thinner and more ragged than he remembered. Michael's eyes welled with tears as he stumbled out of the taxi, calling, "Murphy! Buddy!" Murphy's ears perked up at the sound of that familiar voice. He lifted his head, blinking as if he couldn't believe what he saw. Then, in a burst of trembling energy, Murphy struggled to his feet and hobbled toward Michael, tail wagging so hard it seemed like it might sprain. Michael dropped to his knees on the cold pavement, arms open, and Murphy half-leaped, half-collapsed into them. For a long, tearful moment, man and dog remained in that embrace. Michael stroked Murphy's dirt-streaked fur, murmuring, I'm here, I'm here. I'm so sorry I left you. I'm so sorry you had to go through this." Murphy whined softly and buried his muzzle against Michael's chest, as though to reassure himself this was real. A new beginning. Michael scooped Murphy into his arms, thanking his neighbors profusely for their kindness and help. That night, Murphy slept soundly in Michael's apartment once more, this time, never to be left behind again without Michael planning every detail in the dog's best interest. The next day, Michael took Murphy to the vet. The checkup revealed a few scrapes, some malnutrition, and dehydration, but nothing irreversible. With the same devotion as before, Michael committed himself to nursing Murphy back to full strength. The story of Murphy's dedication and escape spread through the building, earning him the affectionate nickname, the Loyal Pup, among neighbors. Jared visited with groceries and dog treats, apologizing again. Michael simply placed a hand on Jared's shoulder and said, "You did the best you could, man. Murphy just needed to find his way back here." Over time, Murphy bounced back, he regained weight and the spark in his eyes. Michael decided to invest in more permanent changes to ensure he could travel with Murphy whenever possible. He began saving up for a more pet-friendly car or a travel arrangement that would never force a separation of that magnitude again. A heartwarming conclusion. Months later, on a bright spring morning, Michael took Murphy for a celebratory walk around their old neighborhood. Flowers were blooming, and the air felt fresh with promise. Murphy trotted confidently by Michael's side, his tail swishing in pure contentment. As they strolled, neighbors waved and called out greetings. Children ran up to pet Murphy, remembering him from the day he used to ride around in the bike trailer. And in that moment, with the sun shining warmly on the two of them, Michael felt overwhelmed by gratitude. He thought back to the emaciated dog he'd found shivering between trash cans, and he marveled at the faithful companion Murphy had become. Looking down at Murphy, Michael smiled. "We've come a long way, haven't we, buddy?" Murphy gazed up with love shimmering in his caramel eyes and wagged his tail in agreement. The city around them bustled, but man and dog stood united, an unbreakable bond that had weathered distance, misfortune, and separation, only to grow stronger in the end. They finished their walk and returned home, side by side. That evening, as Michael settled on the old couch, Murphy hopped up beside him. Together, they watched the last rays of sunlight slip behind the skyline. The happiness in the room was tangible, two best friends, reunited after every storm, finally at peace in each other's company. And though the future was still unwritten, they both knew that as long as they had each other, everything would be just fine.